This is Carrie Johnson with the Iowa Department of Management. And the purpose of the webinar today is to provide city and county assessors an overview of the fiscal year 25 budget process within the Department of Management's online system. Again, this is for city and county assessors, and it is for the fiscal year 25 budget. If you have prepared the budget in past years, you'll find that the online system looks very similar and should operate in a similar manner, but there have been some updates and things to be aware of that I want to point out to folks as they prepare to do the fiscal 25. So we'll go ahead and provide some general budget information as well as updates and an overview of the system itself. When you are getting ready to operate the system and to look for resources available to city and county assessors, the resource from Department of Management you would use is dom.iowa.gov/other-authorities. On the left-hand side, you'll see tax rates. And under that, you do see assessor rates. If you click on that, what you'll see is a listing of assessor property tax rates going back several years. And if you click on a file, what you'll see is that it is an Excel spreadsheet listing each and every county for that particular year, the different pieces of their total rate, as well as their levy dollars, their valuation, etc. So, if you're doing some research on what other folks are levying or you want some historical information, this is a good place to start. The Department of Management's role in the budget process is that we provide the forms, including those web based forms that we're referring to. We provide instructions, we provide technical assistance, and just sort of guidance throughout the process. And we do that for all the local government budgets in the state that levy property tax, as well as some that don't. So we'll go ahead and jump into a description of the property tax levies available to assessors. The main one is the Assessment Expense Fund. This fund has a levy rate limit of 67.5 cents, and it is to finance the basic maintenance and operations of the assessor. In a sense, it is your general fund. It's where your general operations are managed and accounted for. Assessors also have a FICA and IPERS fund. There is no particular rate limit. It is the amount necessary. Your assessment expense fund must be at its maximum in order to utilize this rate, and it is for the employer's share of the FICA and IPERS cost for their employees. No expenditures are shown in the FICA and IPERS funds. You would transfer to the fund with the salary expenses, which would be your assessment expense fund, of course. Assessors also have an unemployment compensation fund. Again, with this, there is no rate limit. It is the amount necessary to pay for the cost of unemployment coverage, whether that be premiums to become part of the state plan or on sort of the flip side, the cost of unemployment claims that are made by an individual to Iowa Workforce Development. Assessors also have available an emergency levy. This is for an emergency, a fiscal emergency that cannot be financed through the assessment expense fund. It is covered under Code of Iowa 24-6. The rate limit is 27 cents. And it does require the approval of the State Appeal Board. The State Appeal Board is a three-member body that is the Director of Department of Management, the Auditor of State, and the Treasurer of State. If an assessor was wanting to utilize the emergency levy, they would include that levy within their budget forms. They would also complete Form 699, which I would provide to you if you are interested in pursuing this. And then with the budget, you would include your approved budget as well as this form by April 30. You submit that to the county auditor as usual. And then the State Appeal Board would review the budget as well as that additional emergency levy that's proposed to be included, and render a decision on whether or not that emergency levy can stand within the budget. And if it does in fact stand, then funds that are received within the emergency levy must be transferred from that emergency fund to the assessment expense fund to be spent. County and city auditors also have a tort liability fund. There is no rate limit, it is the amount necessary, and it is to pay for the cost of liability insurance. Examples are given here. May also be used for the payment of a judgment or settlement within the scope of 670. So those are the levies, tax levies that are available to city and county assessors, and those have not changed from prior years. One thing that is different in fiscal 25 is that the program that was called the Business Property Tax Credit was disbanded. It was a credit against levied taxes, but now it has transitioned to a reduction in taxable value, which is then replaced. We often hear it referred to as a two-tier program. Again, it's no longer a credit against levied taxes. It's a reduction in value, in taxable value, that the state is then replacing. And it should be budgeted along with other non tax revenues and replacements, where you have been budgeting your commercial and industrial replacement because it is a similar type of revenue. Fiscal year 24 was the first year that you would have received revenue for this program, for this replacement from the state. So you can take a look at what you received for that first half payment in 24 and use that as a way to estimate what you may receive in 25 for that replacement revenue. And I did refer to the commercial and industrial replacement. That is a program that's currently being phased out over a number of years. And we do have estimates to help you determine what you can expect to receive in the out years as the program goes away. And you can find that, that link here in order to take a look at that. One new, two actually, one new program and one change to an existing program that would impact your fiscal year 25 budget. There has been for a number of years a homestead credit available to homeowners. House File 718 that passed during this last legislative session also added on a homestead exemption, and this is for individuals 65 and over. And as assessors, I'm sure you're familiar because those claims, those applications go through your office. For fiscal 25, just as a reminder, those individuals receive a valuation exemption of 3250. This increases to 6500 for fiscal 26 and on. And there's no state replacement revenue for this exemption. So, again, it's just a reduction of your taxable value. And in this instance, there is no replacement for that reduction. Military exemption was also changed by House File 718. It's been a valuation exemption of 1852 for a really long time, but it's now been increased to 4,000 for fiscal year 25 and after. And this military exemption is not being funded by the state moving forward, beginning with that fiscal 25. So, again, these are programs that affect your budget simply by being reductions in value that you need to be cognizant of. The other thing that changed for folks beginning with this fiscal 25 is your budget deadline. So your budget deadline is now April 30. What happened is that 718, House File 718 made significant changes, process changes to city, county, and school budgets that simply require more time to get accomplished. So their deadline was moved to April 30th. And just to be consistent, we moved everybody's deadline basically to April 30th just to not have lots of different deadlines out there and confuse people. Budget protests are something that can happen. Budget protests are covered under Code of Iowa, Section 2427. Individuals within your city or within your county can appeal your budget after it's adopted by filing a petition and appeal with your county auditor, or, well, I mean, it's always with your county auditor in the county in which the local government is located. So, obviously, if you're a city assessor, then they would file those documentations with the county auditor of your city. The deadline for those budget protests is May 10th, and those protest documents would be given to the county auditor. They would then forward those protest documents to the state appeal board that I referenced earlier, that three-member body that's director of DOM, treasurer of state, auditor of state. The state appeal board sends staff out to conduct a local public hearing on the protest and to gather information. And then that information is presented back to the state appeal board and they render a decision on the protest. If you have, any inclination that your budget might be protested or you have questions about this process and you just want to know more, certainly follow up with me and I can provide you with additional information. Keep in mind that a budget amendment is required for any increase in the total for fund. And of course, with county assessors, you also have that issue with your salary because your salary is listed in your budget forms. If that's going to be changed, then you do need to complete a budget amendment indicating that change. Budget amendments must be effective before your expenditure amounts are exceeded. So essentially, you amend before you spend. And they do require the same notice and hearing procedures as are required for the original budget itself. Budget amendments are subject to protest. An amendment of a budget that's done after May 31st that does get protested, but then the state appeal board doesn't have enough time to hold a hearing and make a decision on it before the end of the fiscal year, that amendment is then void. What I do tell folks, though, if you're approaching June and you need to amend, to go ahead and amend. The likelihood of that being protested is a little bit less than the regular budget because you're really talking about requesting authority to expend funds that you already have. It's not, there's no opportunity to increase taxes or anything like that with a budget amendment, so it is a little less likely to be protested. The amendment form is found online. You log into the system, same system. You just find your current year budget and you select amend on that budget. That generates a one-page form that you'll complete and then publish. And we do have a little webinar on the form itself. You can also access instructions within the online amendment form, just to give you a little bit more detail on how that process works. So let's review our budget timeline. So the county auditor certifies valuations by January 1. As you know, those folks are working on that process right now. You would work to develop your proposed budget by January 1. The assessor, those pieces of the budget, the assessor, examining board, and board of review. You combine and file copies with your conference board. And then, when you're ready, you publish notice of a public hearing and proposed budget summary not less than 10 no more than 20 days before the date of that hearing. You hold your hearing and allow for public comment, close your hearing, and then adopt your budget. And it is again certified with the county auditor by April 30. So that's an overview of the budget process itself. So let's take a few minutes to take a tour around the online budget system. If you previously had access to the system, it should transfer from last year. Let me know if you have someone, new in your office that needs access that does not have it. Just send me an email. That individual, I have instructions, but that individual will need to get an enterprise A&A account. They will need to then send me their account ID, and I will give their account ID access to your budget forms. When you're working in the system, if you use the tab key during data entry, it does move between the cells that you are able to enter data in. You can use the arrow keys, kind of whatever works for you. Keep in mind that ending fund balances are produced by subtracting the sum of all expenditures from the sum of that beginning balance and revenues. So, your total resources. As you move within a page, the cell that you're in is highlighted, and then the row and column show a green highlight just to help you navigate the system. To log into the system, you're going to go to the Department of Management website, dom.iowa.gov. You'll select local government and then other authority resources from the drop down menu right here. And this page does have a variety of information and training for local levy authorities. To get into the system itself, you'll go over to the local budget valuation and AFR system and select the Access System button. The first thing you'll see is the homepage, and that's going to list for you each and every county and the status of their valuations, whether they're filed or not filed. And that just tells you whether or not valuation figures are populated within your particular budget forms, and you can, proceed with your budget process and setting your rates. If you are ready to go ahead and work within the system, you would go over here to the login option. It'll take you to the blue box where you enter your account ID and password and sign in. On the main part of the screen, you'll see the new fiscal 25 budget, as well as the current year budget and then past year budgets that have been completed in this system. And to get into that 25 budget, you're going to select the edit icon to start working in the budget. And as I mentioned too, you can view and amend your current year budget from this screen. So basically, if you're needing to amend fiscal 24, you just go over and select amend. Once inside the budget, you're going to see the tabs across the top that represent all those different funds that we talk about. Data entered on the fund tabs are then going to be pulled over to public hearing and adopted budget summary tabs. Each and every fund tab within it have a revenue and expenditure tab that you would complete for any funds that you are using. Again, your county auditor files those valuations, and once the 2023 valuations are filed, those figures are going to populate automatically into your budget. Until valuations are filed, or if the county auditor unfiles valuations for any reason, like to make a correction, if if that happens, you'll see this yellow notice. And if you went into your budget forms today, you'd see this yellow notice, except for a couple counties. And this basically just tells you that your valuations are in an unfiled status. So either they haven't been done yet, or if there's numbers in there, they may be changing. So just sort of be aware that the valuation numbers, if they're in there, may not be final. So I want to point out your adopted budget summary page. And this does pull from all those other pages of your budget, those supplementary pages, all those fund pages. Once you complete those, they'll pull into this budget summary page. The budget summary page is also where you input your tax asking for any funds within which you're levying. So in the system, when you see white cells, they're either pulling from another source or they're a formula. You can't type into those. Blue cells are those that you can type into. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at the property tax piece of that adopted summary page. Again, this is your column where you input your tax asking for those different funds. In this instance, the county auditor has filed value, so that's populated here, and your tax rate can calculate. So in this instance, we have an individual that is levying at the maximum for assessment expense. Maximum again is that 67.5 cents. They do have additional costs that they're needing to bring in revenue for FICA and IPERS, so they're also levying FICA and IPERS for their total requested dollars and their total rate. So we'll go through a quick example of the FICA and IPERS transfer. In this instance, we're saying, okay, so the employer's share of the cost for IPERS in this instance is $500,000. So we're budgeting an expense of $500,000 for FICA. And then we can see, okay, so we know FICA is costing us $500,000. So we're going to levy that $500,000 for the purposes of funding IPERS. When we put it on that page that we just talked about, it's going to then pull over to the FICA fund page as far as the revenue side goes, and it'll populate for you that $500,000. $500,000 is split between the utility replacement tax and property tax asking. And then it also shows within you'll hop back over to that assessment expense fund because as we mentioned, you have to transfer that FICA and IPERS money into the fund in which a salary is located, right? So you're going to have to enter in a transfer of 500 into our assessment expense fund from FICA and IPERS. FICA, excuse me, in this point. And by entering that transfer in from FICA to assessment expense fund, the system is like, oh, well, you need a corresponding transfer out of the assessment expense fund. So the system does that matching transfer for you. So you know you need to spend $500,000 on FICA. You levy for that $500,000 on the adopted budget summary. That comes in with taxes to the FICA fund, and you transfer it from the FICA fund to the assessment expense fund to then again be spent out for that expense. So that's sort of the circle of how that transfer would work. And it is kind of one of those things that people have questions about. So certainly if you're doing that for the first time or you have any questions about it, let me know. Another item that I get a lot of questions about, and certainly contact me if this is applicable to you and you have questions, is designated fund balance. So oftentimes assessors have large projects, don't have to tell you guys that you're saving for several years, right? A large, you know, assessment program valuation that's being done by an outside entity. So you're saving for several years, for instance, because you need to pay out a large sum in a future year. So in this example, you are discussing with your board and you decide to save 100,000 for 2 years and pay out 200,000 in the third year for a particular project. And this seems pretty reasonable. I should probably be upping these numbers. But anyway, this is what it would look like in the third year. So keep in mind each year you're saving 100,000. And then in this case, we're saying, okay, but in the budget year, you're going to pay out that 200,000 that you've been saving to actually pay for the project. So this is what it would look like on the assessment expense fund. You have these uh, descriptions of your fund balance, and fund balance is an interesting term, but it basically means okay, at the end of whatever year this is, what do you have left that's unspent? And we know that whatever you have left at the end of the year, some of that is simply just leftover, right? Like it's money that was not necessarily, maybe it was unanticipated revenue or things just cost less than what you anticipated, et cetera, et cetera. So you have some money that's at the end of the year that is just simply excess resources. But then you also have some money that maybe you've been saving and you've set aside for a particular reason. So when we describe our ending fund balance, We describe some of it. Reserved is usually not applicable to you folks because it's money that is reserved, sort of set aside by law for a particular reason. So that's really not typically what we're talking about here. It's typically you, or your board, I should say, has set aside money or designated money to be used in a future year for something in particular. So your budget always describes 3 years of data. So the actual year that is ended, the year that you're in, current year, and then your budget year. So in this case, what was done back, if we use, the years that we're talking about for the fiscal 25 budget, this would be fiscal 23. So fiscal 23 is over, right? Like we know what our balance looked like for fiscal 23. It happened, almost 6 months ago. It ended almost 6 months ago. So we know at the end of fiscal 23, we had $500,000 left. But our board said, okay, there's 500,000, but 100,000 of that is actually set aside or designated for something we're going to do in a couple of years. So really all that's left for, any particular purpose or emergency or just, sort of that savings is 400,000. So we could spend that 400,000 as needed if we were required to, but that 100,000 the board has said we're saving that for a future year. And so in this case the board said, okay, we want to do that for a couple years. So in the current year we are left with 600,000, but we our board said, okay, we want to grow our savings. So we're saving another 100,000 of that to be used in a future year. So our savings grew from 100 that we came into the year with. We added another 100 that we saved during the current year, or we are saving during the current year. At the end of our current year, we plan to have 600,000 with $200,000 of that set aside for something we're going to pay for in the budget year. So our savings grows until we actually make the expense up here. And then we see this line is now empty. So we saved for 2 years, grew our savings, and then spent it out. The designated fund balance, like I mentioned, generates a lot of questions. So if you have questions about that, or you want me to look at what you've done and sort of talk you through it, I'm happy to do so. Once in the budget, you of course can check errors anytime. Please save often, and you can also print at any time. When you're printing, you can print the full budget, like all the budget forms, or you could also just do the current tab. So that's an option as well. And then once you propose your budget for publication, you can also just print the publication notice. If in Google Chrome, which we highly recommend, and please use the most recent version, you can select your local printer, and print it off that way, or you can save to PDF and then put it on your machine. Again, supplementary details, you enter those revenue and expense details on those detail sheets, all those different tabs. It pulls it forward to the adopted budget summary and the hearing notice tab. On the hearing notice tab, if you want to include electronic or virtual information, if you're still providing that as an option, then there is a text box that you can include that information. Of course, as I mentioned, you want to check errors. The system will not let you propose a budget that has errors in it. Now, by errors, I mean really like statutory errors. I don't know whether or not you typed in a number correctly, but I do know if your levy rate exceeds that $6, 67.5 cents. Or, I do know if you didn't complete anything in that expense fund budget. So there's certain things we know are errors, and we're going to check for those. Once you have no errors, it'll look green and you can proceed. And you would go on to then propose and publish your regular budget notice. So when you propose publish, it's going to bring up this screen, and that's where you enter your date, time, and place for your hearing notice. And that, again, you can save off to your system. So then you can forward it to your newspaper, however it might work for you. Following the public hearing, the council can make any allowable revisions. So say you have your public hearing, the public presents a good argument about reducing a particular expenditure or tax, and your council decides that you want to reduce that, and that can be done. You can always go down in tax asking or expenditures from what you published. You can never go over. So if that happened, you'd go back to your budget, you'd return it to draft, which essentially just opens it up so you can edit it. You'd make your changes and save, and then your budget would be again proposed and published just to walk it through that next step. Um, for most cases, you just use that original publication date, unless for some reason you are republishing. You really only typically republish if there was something wrong with your publication and you have to have a full new hearing date, which, we hope that doesn't occur. But at any rate, you propose publish again, and then you're ready to adopt, or if no revisions were needed in the first place, you just click adopt, and you enter the adoption date of your board and click the adopt button. You would file with your county auditor the proof of publication for your budget notice, the thing that you get from your newspaper that proves that you published it on a certain date. And then you'd also provide your auditor with the signed adopted budget and supplementary pages. Once those items are with your county auditor, they do a process just to double check everything and then certify your budget. If you have any questions at all regarding the budget process as you're working in the system, or you want me to take a look at something, I'm happy to do so. You feel free to call me or to send me an email, and we'll get that budget done. So thanks so much. Have a good day.